Welcome to Building the Future. I'm your host, Kevin Horick. You can find the show online at buildingthefutureshow.com or follow me on Twitter at buildingshow. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, and YouTube. Welcome back to the show. Today we have Blaine Bertsch, founder of Dry Run. Blaine, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so maybe before we kind of get into Dry Run and what you're doing there, let's maybe get to know you a little bit better and talk about kind of where you grew up.
Sure. Well, I'm from Edmonton, Alberta. Born
Same
and
as
raised.
me.
Yeah, there's one of the few that actually is born and raised and kind of stuck around. Yeah, so I've been here basically my whole life, outside of a couple of years that I lived in Ottawa as a kid. So
Sure, and you have a place in Arizona, correct?
yes, in Scottsdale. Yeah.
So do you spend much time down there, or?
Yeah, I guess technically we're snowbirds. We go down in the fall. We'll be go down in just a few weeks now, and we'll be down there until spring. And I suppose I'm kind of young to do that, but running a business from really wherever I am kind of works for me. So it's nice to be able to sneak away for a bit.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. That's where I want to be one day, is definitely when the snow hits, just get out of here for months, or at least the cold weeks, right?
Yeah, exactly. And some people love the winter, and I just turned out to not be one of them, I guess. So it's nice.
I always joke that I was meant to live in a country or a climate that had one season, and that's called summer. And if the temperature changes more than 5 degrees, I don't want to live there.
Yeah, I'm with you. I call it patio season. If I can sit on the deck, I'm good to go. So it's I try and I keep telling my wife I'm trying to make over 360 days a year of wearing shorts. So,
Yeah, that's a good goal, actually. That's awesome.
yeah.
So maybe let's talk about how you kind of got into technology.
Sure. I started out actually at U of A in their design program, Bachelor design program, back in the mid '90s, and that was really around the time the internet was starting to kind of come into focus, and you could actually design websites. They were really super basic websites, all responsive. Because back then you actually did it responsive. I was kind of laughing when it seemed to come back that way. So I kind of got a real interest in technology at that time. And so, even as a student, I was working on building some websites and making, CD-ROMs with Director.
Yeah, I remember those
And
days.
yeah, it was quite a different experience technology-wise. And everything was a lot more difficult. You still had to hand disks around and things like that. And so when I graduated university, I got my first job in this little design shop, and we started doing websites because all of a sudden customers were saying, "Hey, we need a website," and so I started to play around with even some Flash at that time, and I started teaching a course in Flash at Grant MacEwan. And I can't remember what version of Flash it was. It was an awful long time ago, but it was kind of funny because I was asked to teach the course, and I was about a half a step ahead of the students the whole weekend. I'd get them going on something. I'd be flipping through some book to try and figure out what my next little part of the lesson was. But it worked out pretty good. So and so that just kind of gave me a real taste for technology. But my background is actually as a designer. I went back to school, got a master's degree in design as well. So it's sort of that foundation of everything I kind of do is in design and user experience. But I definitely have a real strong interest in technology right from the beginning.
Sure. No, I think that's awesome. And I kind of like, well, I like what you're doing with Dry Run, and I like the fact that you're kind of a designer doing a startup is kind of one of the things that really kind of appealed to me about having you on the show as well, because you are looking at from kind of a different angle than a lot of people, right? And I think over the last few years, a lot more designers have started doing their own startups, and I think more and more need to do it. And the fact that you have a design background and are doing it, I think is really awesome. So maybe we could cover a little bit. I know you ran your own company for a little while. Do you want to maybe cover that a little bit and what you guys kind of did, and then we can kind of get into Dry Run?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I ran my own company for quite a long time. Actually, I was only in that my first job for maybe about 3 years, something like that, which was great. I learned a lot. But I think it was around 1999. I just decided I wanted to do something on my own, and kind of ventured out on my own. And so that was really the start of my first business. It was honestly all I had was a laptop. And back in that time, it was kind of funny because it was very rare for a small business or a designer just work on a laptop. But I knew at that time I had to try and get customers, so I had quite a few friends that tried starting out on their own, and they got these really expensive setups in their office, and waited for the doorbell to ring, and that just doesn't work that way. And I was quite fortunate. I got just a laptop, got some software, and then just started hitting the bricks trying to get customers. And I did that for a while. I was also ran what was called the Center for New Media at Grant MacEwan as a contract as well, and so that kind of was a nice little bit of money that came in while I was getting my business off the ground. And then just over a few years, I started getting more work. I ended up I hired a staff member. We landed at that time quite a decent sized job, a government project with what would end up being a future business partner. And so it just sort of step by step. I kind of started out myself in my home, uh, until I had just a small shop, and I had a couple of designers, a couple of developers, a project manager, just a great little shop. And at that point, we were doing a lot of digital things, and some really interesting things. We did some, museum installations. We did some touchscreen kiosks. We did some web work, a lot of video work, kind of these interactives online that used a lot of video, and a real mix of really interesting things. So I, really that I was part of that sort of design business and service business up until I think it was about 2012 when I decided to sell that business, move on, and get started on dry run.
Sure. So that's a great segue into, maybe let's talk about kind of what is dry run and how you came up with the idea.
Yeah, well, dry run is actually it's for small businesses to manage their cash flow and do financial forecasting, and that's something that I learned running my own business. It was uh, to be honest, I didn't pay that much attention to our finances until the recession hit. It was about 2009, and all of a sudden, we had clients just slamming the door on their budgets. We had some clients just completely going out of business and gone. And for us, suddenly it was instead of just sort of money was coming in the door and we just had enough top line revenue and didn't really worry about it. Suddenly, we were kind of scrambling to get new customers, and now I had all this overhead, and that struggle was really the first kind of inception for what would end up to be dry run later. Was just the struggle with spreadsheets to try and figure out, you know, what's coming in the door, and can we keep our door open? Quite frankly, at that point, it was, you build a business up, and there's a certain point where it becomes complicated because suddenly it's not just you, or it's not just you and one or two other people. Suddenly you have all of these expenses. Now you have all this overhead, and these bills are coming. You're paying your staff every 2 weeks, and you're paying your rent and taxes and everything monthly, and suddenly it gets really complicated. And as you start to look at the numbers, you realize a couple bad months, and your doors are shut, and you owe a lot of money. And so suddenly there's this stress put on my shoulders. And I'm a designer by trade. I didn't have any finance background, and so this was something I really struggled with. And we had of course we had accountants and bookkeeper and everything, but they're not a lot of help in that sense because they don't know what's coming down the pipe. They don't know if you're going to have enough work next month. They really look at your past records of what's happened, and that doesn't help me keep my doors open. So I started to build up systems within our own business, using spreadsheets. We started to actually do some product work at that point, which was also something that really helped lead into dry run. We started doing mobile apps in I think it was 2009. It was right after the iPhone came out in Canada.
Right.
We started doing some mobile apps, and I got a real bug for product actually at that time, at sort of the same time. But part of that was just we had to try and bring some money in, uh, And it was interesting because I did find that by really getting a handle on where we were at and kind of knowing, kind of what our burn rate was every month and what we needed to come in when these payments were going to come in, um, it actually really helped grow the business because suddenly it wasn't just foggy. Suddenly you could look and go, man, we got our sales are they're like, we got a big trough in the summer, and we got to, and you can start to see these things months out, and then you start remedying it. Now you're selling hard, even though you might be busy. You're selling hard to get that work to come in when you need it, and starts to stabilize your sales pipeline, starts to stabilize that cash flow. And also by the end of the year, we had like one of our best years. I think was in 2011 or 2012. Like we actually bounced back really well, and I think a lot of it was because we suddenly knew where we stood, and we had those really strong goals in mind, and could adjust along the way. So that's really the start of Dry Run was these days of my own business for a number of years where I just tried to figure out um, how to understand finance and how to understand how that affects my business and how to make it sort of actionable, how I can use that information to make decisions and grow my business.
No, I think that's awesome. And I kind of love the idea of startups that are based on kind of sometimes based on your own need, right? And it based on your own experience, you can create a product that, will help you and other people. And the fact that I think a lot of people forget about kind of managing their finances and yeah, it's like money's coming in, we're good, right? And that's kind of where they left off, like you mentioned. So I think having a piece of software or something to track and manage that, and like you said, no, oh, well, this summer's going to be slow, we need to start selling in maybe April or May or something. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, and the big thing actually, to be honest, looking back now, is that I realize how much money we left on the table, and it kind of, when I think about it, kind of makes me sick because I realize um, we focused so much on the product we had going out the door. Of course, that's paramount. We focused so much on customer service. We focused so much on creativity. That was all really important, but we never really knew if we were profitable on the
Right.
until I started getting these systems in place, and then you start to realize that we could have offered really the same level of a service, but we just had to know. We had to know where we were at. We had to make some decisions. We had to improve some efficiencies to make sure that we were actually profitable and actually making money. Because there's lots of ways to kill a business, and cash flow is one of them. You got to pay your staff, you got to pay your rent, and you're sitting there waiting for a check to come in. It doesn't come in. And if you have no padding, you're in trouble, and it doesn't take long until you're closing your doors. But on the other side, um, you can you can have some really strong sales. You can be busy. You can have people paying you on time. But if you have this big trough because you haven't been selling, and at the end of the year you're down, you don't have enough money to cover your expenses, or you're not profitable. It's like those three things can actually kill a business, and some of them are kind of they're that slow death, death by a thousand cuts, and you don't realize it because you're not paying attention to it, and all of a sudden you're in the red, and you're in the red, and you're in the red, and you can't dig yourself out. So it's that whole side to me was something that I was really focused on making a product that a non-finance person, because very few business owners come from finance. They're usually domain experts in whatever field they're in. um, and I wanted to make something that works for the sort of your average business owner, that they can get hold of their finances. It's visual, it's easy to use. And we even the way we split up Dry Run as sort of a philosophy is we kind of say, okay, take all your recurring payments and expenses and even income, and sock that away. You know what your burn rate is every month. You know what's coming in and what's going, and focus on those receivables and those payables, especially in a service business. Those are the ones that are going to kill you. Those big invoices that are floating out there if you're not getting paid on time, or if you just don't have enough work coming in. And the second thing that we did with Dry Run that I know I struggled a lot with was even using spreadsheets or whatever you're using. I only had a single view of my business, and I couldn't compare scenarios. I couldn't sort of look at those what ifs, and that was really important because it was, sometimes it was, what if we don't get paid this check on time? How do we manage that? But a lot of it also was, quite frankly, what if we land that big contract? Do we have enough capacity? When will we start getting paid? When will this money start coming in? Because if we have to have capacity, we might not have the actual money in place to be able to pay the people that we're bringing in. Things can start to get really complicated, and it can get really stressful when you don't know where you're headed. It's this nagging, awful feeling in the back of your mind where you feel a little out of control, a little indecisive, and you're like, okay, where are we going here? And it's amazing what really honestly what a few minutes a week can do to just know where you're at, and keep track of things. It helps you make those decisions, but also, frankly, it takes that stress level down a few notches as well.
Sure. So it's dryrun.com. And if I go there, kind of how do I get started? And then what do I kind of do once I create an account?
Well, you can get started with a free 30-day trial right on dryrun.com, and that'll take you right into Dryrun, and you can just start playing around with the product. We have, you can actually message us from right inside the product if you have, questions or anything like that. So we'll get back to you as soon as we possibly can. Usually we're really quick to when people are asking questions, and you just sort of dive in and play around with it. Now we do have some new things in the works for Dry Run. We're just actually rolling out a new version of it that's coming out this fall. And one of the common questions we have is, do we integrate, and do we automatically import other data? And that's some of the things that we're going to be doing this fall, where we'll start integrating with some of the really common expenses and invoice tools, to help bring that data in, just to make it a lot easier and faster to get going. And we're also going to bring in templates so that if you're a startup or you haven't really been tracking your stuff and you don't really know where to start, we're going to actually help you get started and give you sort of that starting point and that model that you can look at.
No, that's awesome. So what is the cost of Dry Run?
Dry Run starts at $19 a month. It's just a monthly subscription. Now we are going to introduce a couple of new pricing levels this fall and into the new year. Again, based just on what customers are telling us that they want, that really isn't in the product. And so very soon we're going to have, like, you can already export from Dry Run. You can export a graph, you can export a spreadsheet. But we have our customers telling us they'd like to do some more sort of advanced reporting, kind of one-click, beautiful report they can send off to their board or their accountant or their bank, whatever it is. So that's going to be a new level, and it'll come along with a new monthly price once we've settled on that. And then we're also doing some more advanced collaboration. We've had a lot of requests for people managing larger teams, managing the teams within even an enterprise environment with multiple budgets. And so we're working on some collaboration features that I think will be really, really useful for that sort of environment. And that'll also be coming out likely later this fall or early in the new year. And that'll also give us a third price point as well.
No, that's awesome. I think what's really key and what I like about what you guys are doing is you're really getting feedback from your users. And I think some companies seem to forget about that, right? That just because you think, what your customer wants, it might be correct, it might not be, but the fact that you're taking users' feedback and, trying to basically build new features to accommodate your current customers and, future customers, I think is really, really important. And I think some people forget about that and they don't understand the importance of kind of user testing and getting customer feedback and even supporting your current customers.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like, I look at the way Dry Run is heading right now. This new build we have coming out, but then sort of our roadmap for the next 4 to 6 months is built on the back of our customers, and that feedback is just so incredibly valuable. And it's easy to think, well, you can't jump and you can't respond to everything a user says, and that's completely true. But the more feedback you get, it doesn't take long to start identifying trends and realizing, this is a fefeature that is asked for quite frequently. It makes perfect sense. Yeah, it's got to be in there because it's actually affecting our conversion. And from it's a I shouldn't start with conversion because that's not where we start. We always start with it's affecting our customers, it's affecting our users. I can see why. And it's sometimes we have a customer, just they'll mention a feature request, and it may be the first time we've heard it, but we've had some where it's the first time I've heard it, but is absolutely a head slapper. You look at it and go, that is the most obvious thing that should be in there. Absolutely, we just missed it. and
Sure.
and not all customers will pick up on it, but as soon as you introduce it, they're like, oh, that's terrific, that makes perfect sense. So having that way to get customer feedback is just it's just so important. And so that was something we've been working on since we launched. Initially, when we launched, we had a little burst of people, but then it starts to settle down, and you're starting to get into, okay, how do we get that consistent traffic, the consistent signups, and consistent feedback? And we worked on that for quite a while, but it really paid dividends, because we have a way that we're getting kind of constant feedback. It's very easy for people to get hold of us from right inside the app, ask us questions. We prompt them with little survey questions, and excuse me, and that makes a really big difference to really understanding your product. You've got to reach out to them. You can't just expect them just to kind of try and track you down. You've got to kind of ask them, prompt them, and it's amazing sometimes when someone's asked me a quick question, and I'll get on to like we use Intercom, which
Yeah.
it's just been terrific, to be honest. It's really a great tool for us. And I'll get on with a customer, and suddenly, half hour, 45 minutes later, we've just been chatting back and forth, and they're giving me full descriptions of what type of business they run, and how they approach it, and what their challenges are. And it's that's really it's really fascinating, but it's also really gratifying, because you get a lot of feedback where it's great when you hear people say, this is fantastic, I've been searching for this forever, and blah blah blah. That's just awesome to get that feedback, but we always prompt them, like, what can we do to make it better? And sometimes it's some really simple things. Like, one of them was just again, it was just one of the obvious ones, but one of our customers said one time, said, well, the one thing is just don't log me out as soon, because I'm in and out of the office all the time. I just want to be able to pop in, and I don't want to be logged out so fast. And
Sure. That's
hey,
that's actually really good feedback, and it's a simple fix, right, on your end.
exactly, super simple fix, and just something that we kind of went, yeah, okay, that totally makes sense, and so it's that feedback has just been phenomenal. And the other really interesting thing we found is we built it as really a North America product, to be honest, because we're familiar with that business environment. That's where we're going to get started. We use the dollar on everything right now. Our new build will actually be we'll convert currencies and all that. So you can use your currency symbol and everything, and then your number styles and all that. But the interesting thing is we've had signups from over 70 countries.
Oh, wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's amazing, and we have customers from paying customers, 7 or 8 countries. In our current build, that it does not really be. I'll be honest, it doesn't work that well for people in a lot of other using different currencies, but we found out that the need is there, and it's so strong that they'll just use it anyway. And it's amazing how many. Hey, when can I change my currency? Well, it's coming really soon, but you've got to get that first product out there. You've got to get feedback. That was just one of the things we sacrificed initially, is just, let's just roll it out and see what happens. And that was a bit of a surprise. And it's something we're kind of looking at. How do we make this work for people across the world? Because they obviously need it. It brings challenges with how you're going to actually charge for the product, because of course currencies vary in value so much.
Sure.
But for me, when I look at it, I'm just, you have people from all over the world just popping on, asking questions, giving feedback. And these are all small business owners, and we want to help them. We want to be there helping them run their business. So it's not as much about, bringing in money from all these different regions, because it's probably, frankly, easier for us just to focus on a few key markets. But we want a way to help people across the world, because they're saying right now, like, we need this thing. Okay, well, let's figure out a way to make it work better for everybody. So it's been a big surprise, actually.
No, I think that's awesome. And I think you touched on a really key point that I really want to kind of reiterate is, like you said, obviously it only accepts the dollar right now. And you knew that going in, that, basically the point I'm trying to make is that you basically released it before you were 100% happy with like a feature, right? And that feature was currency. And I think that's the big thing. Like, a lot of people forget is they spend so much time trying to get everything perfect, where, you know, you released it, you probably assumed that there was probably a demand for it, but you validated that with people using it all across the world saying, you know, we can you roll this out? And a lot of times, like you mentioned, people are just saying, well, we don't really care that it's in dollars and that's not my current currency. We still want to use the product. We'll just tell you that we are using the product and that we want, you know, to suggest that feature in the future. And I think that's super important, because a lot of people will spend months or years rolling out something, and then they launch it and then they get a bunch of feedback, and sometimes they even have to change the entire product, where you roll it out when you have a good enough version that makes a lot of sense and that's usable, but maybe doesn't work in certain parts of the world. I think that's really important to mention again.
Yeah, that's a struggle, especially as an entrepreneur. And you know what? I'll be honest, being a designer, it's a real struggle for me to launch things that I'm not, you know, 100% sort of happy with. But it's that the other side is that whole launch and learn. And
Sure.
and
Yeah.
you sort of have to, like, I just sort of had to force myself to go, no, it's good enough. Let's get it out. We have to get feedback. And every time we do new features, and quite frankly, even the second version, we've taken so much feedback. We know we have to integrate these other tools. So we're making this product really from scratch to sort of accommodate all this information we have, and make it, you know, perform better. But we also know we've got to get this out. It's not going to be it's not going to have everything that we want right away. But it's again, even in this point, it's like, when is it good enough? When is it a really nice
Yeah.
step up in what we have? And that's really hard for entrepreneurs to let go of. But it's so important. And it's that old sort of MVP sort of mantra. The one thing that I sort of caution other entrepreneurs, though, is focus on the V, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
not the M.
Totally.
Um, that's something that is really important. Is you have to have that value there, and if you have that core value there, then you can get those users and get really usable feedback. But you've just got to get it out there, and it's never finished. So just get it out there as soon as you can, and learn from it, and make sure you have that feedback loop in. Make sure you're talking with your customers, you know, get as much information as you can back from those customers the second you launch. That's really, really important.
Sure. No, I think that is really good advice. And as a fellow designer, I totally understand the struggle of just kind of letting go. And I think it's also another key point, and it might sound maybe a little controversial, especially coming from a designer, but I really think that, you know, designers obviously push for the design to be perfect, and developers push for their piece to be perfect, and the business side kind of pushes for timelines and budget and that stuff. And everybody's got their kind of what they think is the most important. And I think the best designers I've worked with, and I've really kind of shifted my attitude the last few years towards the whole, like, you know, at the end of the day, yes, I think my piece is the most important, and you probably think the design piece is the most important as well. But you also have to step back and say, like you mentioned, like, the most important thing is, what can we do in the time allotted before a release date, or with what's in budget, or what's buildable within that amount of time, right? Because yeah, I can do anything in Photoshop or Sketch, but if it's not buildable in 3 weeks, when we have to roll out this feature for a customer or a trade show or whatever it is, if we miss it because one of those segments missed the boat or really pushed too far, then I don't think you're being a very good team player either. So I think letting go and knowing when to let go, and it's good enough, at least for a current version, and you might come back to it later, I think is a super important point that you touched on. And I just kind of want to reiterate that, because I think there's a shift in the industry where, you know, especially when you're rolling out product and you're launching new features, that you really need to consider all the avenues and the people that you're working with to roll out these features on time and get them out so people can start testing them and using them and giving you feedback.
Yeah, and you know, one of the struggles, I like, again, like, I come from a design background. I've been immersed in that design culture. I actually taught design at the U of A as a sessional for 6 years, and it's it's something that I'm getting more and more, this sort of iteration and launch and get feedback, even in a design sense, because
Sure.
design traditionally is so much. You kind of get the brief, you walk away, you kind of go in your little, corner, you design something, and it's grand unveiling at the end, and this is the beautiful whatever I designed, and designers can get into that sort of on that treadmill where they just kind of keep doing that. And I think philosophically, it works better when you're really doing a collaborative design, when you're getting feedback not only
Totally.
from users and customers, but also from developers, from the
Hmm.
marketing people, from all of these sides, and you're taking that information and figuring out, um, how to really deliver something that works. And it's a different approach in design to sort of take those steps and go iteration, 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 feedback, 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 is very different than the sort of the grand unveiling. But I think that's the way design has to move,
Agreed.
especially in a digital world.
Sure. No, I totally agree. And like when I'm doing design, I always pull a developer or two, and even somebody from the business side or marketing side. I consider them kind of one and the same. Like I don't mean to group them together. It's just I like to have somebody that's kind of either like managing the product or timeline or client, or and so I just call them the business side. It's way easier to have three verticals instead of, but I always have at least, a developer and somebody kind of on the marketing or business side in the room. And then we'll just wireframe on a whiteboard, right? And then I'll go away, do a design, pull them back in, kind of work through or like walk them through the flow, kind of get their feedback, do another round, and then, kind of go through that. And it might take 2 or 3 rounds before you kind of get a version one of something you're going to build, but at least you have buy-in from kind of all three sides on what's buildable, what's in the timeline, and kind of what's going to work from the design side. And I think that's super important. And I love that we kind of share that same passion and value when it comes from design, especially when you're building products.
Well, yeah, and the business side is, the business goals are so paramount, and that's the one area that a lot of times designers just, kind of ignore. But it really, in the end, you've got this business goal, and that's really proof of whether it works or not. And I've taken sort of that collaborative design a few times to a very, right on sort of the fringe. Lately, there's been a few times where I've actually, been designing with a customer, because I actually have done a little bit of a client work on the side here and there, just because I'm still kind of a, designer at heart. and
Sure.
and um, and even on dry run as well, and sat there and actually, this is, of course, this is like a horror story for designers, when you tell people, and designers I know have been forced to do this, and it's just can be so awful, is when you sit there with the customer and all these people, and they're all throwing ideas at you while you're trying to design, and it's just like, it's like designer hell. But I've actually had that work really well a few times, and it's because I instigated it, and I said, hey, let's sit down and let's try and figure this out. And what I found is when I'm sort of working on this sort of design with a lot of people sort of sitting there, and we're trying to figure something out. Um, if we sort of stay on the sort of the business goals, and the discussion is about how do we make this work better for, sort of that end use, how do we make it work better for the user. It's There's been a few times where it's worked really well, and it's been really interesting, because, when it's designers sometimes in a situation like that just sort of shut down, and just
Hmm.
like, well, you tell me what to do and I'll do it, and then it goes south really really quick. uh, but it was really interesting, because when I was sort of saying, okay, here's where we got to go, and we had some tight deadlines, we had to figure this out, and it's like, all right, just let's figure this out right now, everybody gather around. But when we kept it on a user experience level, we talked about the business goals and how it was contributing to that. um, it ended up being a really constructive way to adapt and sort of evolve a design, because he had this sort of instant feedback loop, and these instant comments, and uh, some of it I thought was really valuable as well, because when you're on the web, when you're in a product like that, um, that first gut reaction people have, a lot of times, that's exactly what's going to happen on the web. You have a matter of a few seconds to get someone's attention, and It's definitely not a tactic I would use all the time, but it was something that I found really interesting. And I know when designers sometimes get thrown into that situation where it's sort of that design by committee, that's what I would encourage them to do is actually just change the way you discuss it and change the sort of context to be all about business case outcomes and user, and that actually can really help that process go really quite smoothly rather than feeling like you're just sort of someone says turn it blue, okay, I'll turn it blue and see what happens, right? So
Yep.
it's an interesting experience where a few years ago I probably looked at that and thought, oh man, there's nothing worse, and then I had it work a few times.
No, I think that's really interesting because I've kind of done that in the past as well. And I think what I learned from it is you can really steer, and you kind of have to watch your wording a little bit sometimes, I find. But at the end of the day, if you can be in front of the client or committee of people and you can get them to say, like, look, this is our target market, and none of us are that target market, because, like, let's say it's for nurses, for example, right? And if you're sitting in a boardroom with a client and you're building a product for nurses, well, if none of them are nurses, they're not the target market. And if you can really get them to focus on, like, here's the user stories and here's who we're designing for, and traditionally based on experience and research, these are what colors and fonts and imagery speak to nurses, and you have everybody focused on the target market and not their opinion, designing in front of the client or a committee of clients can actually be really useful, and you can save a lot of time if you keep the focus on the end user and not kind of their opinion. And I think it's actually quite fascinating that you've tried this as well, because I haven't met a lot of other designers that are kind of, I guess, have the balls to do it like you have. And, I think it's awesome to talk about this.
It's a risky it's a risky one to try, but when it works, it works really well. And the other thing I really encourage designers to do is to do a lot of user testing, and
Sure.
that can be such a humbling experience. I know I know you've stood there and watched users using something and went, "Oh man,"
Mm-hmm.
it can be so humbling because you're like, "How are they not finding that? Or how are they so confused by this?" Um, but when you really when you really push that user testing and you're very hands off, and it's funny. I've seen some. I've actually just recently actually went through a user testing document from a friend of mine, and it was a project he was working on, and I'm like, your user testing document was just it was too guided. I could sort of see it's like, hey, we're going to skip the first three steps, and then we'll be able to give the check box on the fourth. And man, you got to start right from scratch, because sometimes it can be the actual fundamental, like the ideal circumstance the way you're talking about is you have to get nurses, you have to get them in front of the computer, and get that feedback from that user group, because there's usually some unique things that can happen that can be common across a user group, but isn't sort of standard, so-called standard on the web. Um, and it can be really humbling, but it's amazing how much better the product and the designs will be when you do that and you have that user group sitting there and have them sort of involved with that process.
Totally. I used to joke at my last job that anytime you feel like you're the greatest designer on the planet, just start doing some user testing, and you will get your ego checked so fast about, like, where you dropped the ball or what you didn't even consider within, like, a matter of minutes. So I always
Oh
found
man.
that really humbling. You're just like, like, if you need an ego check, just do some user experience testing.
Oh yeah, and man, and it's funny because I don't know what the pass fail rate should be for user experience, but at the odd time, usability, the odd time I know we've sat there and been like, wow, like there's an 80-90% failure rate on some little, some item somewhere, and you're like, man, I thought that made sense, but it is like absolute utter failure,
Yeah, but
But
I like that we're having this open discussion about this stuff, because I, I I'm kind of sick of the user experience consultant that will tell you they're gonna get it right out of the gate every time. It's like, nobody will. It'll never happen. You
no.
might get 80%, you might get 40% sometimes, right? The odd time you might get it 100%, right? If you've done a lot of work in certain industries, but the fact is, if you do user testing before it goes live, you can catch those like, oh my God, what was I thinking? Well before, with a select group of people. And you don't need lots of people. You can get it with a handful of people, maybe 10 people. You get feedback. If you get 5 or 6 nurses, they're going to catch 90% of the user experience problems. You don't need tens of people or hundreds of people to do it. And there is tools online that you can do that with, but in a lot of cases, you don't need that many people to verify your user experience for your target market.
No, not at all. I always think the bare minimum is three.
Oh, yeah,
Six
even
to ten
better.
is great, but it's amazing what you'll find out. And like I said, even when you're watching user testing, even with a single user, there's times where I've looked and go, yeah, now that I see that, that's going to catch everybody. Like I know right away. And then
Sure.
there's the more subtle things, and there's areas where it's like, well, is that going to be something that's going to confuse everybody, or is this a unique situation? Of course, that's when you get 6 to 10 users can really help you. But past that, you're burning through money, and you're not you're not getting that same sort of feedback. And but it's one of the most humbling experiences, but it's also one that can take you the furthest. And it was easier for me to sort of, I guess, be a little bit dismissive of user testing, user experience, and getting down to the really fundamental, like, let's test this and make sure we got it right, until it's an actual like product and people have to buy it. And if they don't, I'm a failure. Like there's no wiggle room. I'm not getting paid for this unless people really like the product and buy it. And so suddenly it changes your mind a bit to go like, yeah, now it's what is going to get us a better user experience faster? What is going to get us success faster? Where are they dropping off? You just out of necessity, you've got to take that process. But you can take that same process just in user testing on service products and everything else, and it'll massively improve them. But it actually takes a bit more discipline when it's not it's not your ass on the line, it's somebody else's kind of thing, right? It's but I think designers could benefit so much from being much more collaborative, much more test everything with the users, and gain that feedback. And it's not to make things perfect, but it will make things a lot better.
Sure. No, I think that's super important. And I also like how, and it's kind of going back a little bit, that you touched on kind of doing support as well and getting feedback. And I think the fact that people and your customers get to talk to you, the founder, and kind of give their feedback to the founder, I find is really useful. People are like, he really cares because he's talking to me as a customer, and you almost become friends with your customers a little bit. And you're just, you end up just kind of having a little bit of conversation about like, hey, how's it going? How's life? What's new? And I think that's also super valuable too, that once you start interacting with your customers and you start getting their feedback, and just you almost become friends. And I think that can be super, super important. And then they're a lot more open to give you honest feedback if you're kind of almost like a friend with them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's building up that rapport with your customers and with your users is so critical. And you never know where that person is going to be. It's amazing that like we recently got a customer from Edmonton. I have no idea who it is. I don't know how they found out about us. Maybe just straight online. And someone I haven't really been able to connect with yet. So it's just. But on the other hand, I had one of our customers from Boston just phone me one day, and we were on the phone for like an hour, and it
Yeah.
was it was amazing. Like the useful information they had, and it's like, first off, the guy's like, I've never phoned a company like yours before in my life, but this could be really great for my business. Here's how I'm using it, but here's where we really need to go with it. And it was such a great conversation. And when you get those, it's almost like we were talking about this user testing. Like, man, I don't need to get feedback from hundreds and hundreds of people, just flowing in. But man, like, it's just that handful every week where you just get that really good feedback and those great conversations happening. That's where you get that real value, and you start to see those trends. It's like a couple months ago, we actually had two. I had two people within about an hour ping me on intercom with the same issue, and it's a really little issue. But I realized, I'm like, man, that little issue is actually really affecting our customers. It's affecting conversion, and but it was amazing. It's like, that's not a hard fix. But when I looked at it from sort of a bigger picture, I'm like, yeah, but that's no wonder they, for their specific instance, it is affecting them. But when it's two of them within an hour, I'm like, how many people that have signed up have left us and would never tell us? We didn't know. And but
Sure.
that's the reason, right?
No, that's
So
totally good.
it's amazing what that's the one thing that I would just that we talked about, like for anyone that's trying to launch a product, it's launch and learn, launch quick. It took way too long for us to get our initial product out, even though we were really pushing for it, but try and get it out quick, launch and learn, and just anything you can do to get that customer feedback is just so important.
Sure. No, I think that's awesome. And it also can even open up new markets to you, right? Like if sometimes a customer's like, if you have these three features, I can use this in this part of my business. And that might open up markets that you never even considered that, you add a few things and those features might take, 100 hours, or they might take like 4 hours. I don't know. And you kind of have to judge that for your own business. But I think sometimes I've seen that happen where you add a couple things and it kind of goes crazy. And all of a sudden you're in this new market and you're like, well, this is awesome, right? My product's growing in this market that I never even considered.
Well, and some of the things like even we were originally priced on number of users, and we were told basically, from the feedback we got, flat out, that's the wrong way to do it. Like our customers did not want that. Our potential customers did not want that. And what was interesting is in the end, the way we're modeling it now, if a customer has multiple users, or maybe it's an accountant that has a bunch of their businesses on it, because we've actually been asked to sort of better accommodate that.
Interesting.
It makes it like it'll make us a lot more money, makes it a lot more profitable, which of course gives us a lot more room to be able to build the business. But they didn't care. They're willing to spend more if it works better for their business. And even sort of our pricing levels, they've just been told absolutely plain outright, yeah, if you did this, I'd pay that a month, easy. I need this. And it's like, wow, that is amazing feedback to have. And when you kind of get that more than once, you realize, yeah, okay, that's where we have to go. There's a problem here that we're 80% of the way there, but man, this last bit will put them over the edge to becoming a customer. But it also can really improve our that average customer value that is so important to get, to make yourself sustainable and start to grow that business.
Sure. That is pretty incredible when you have customers basically saying, if you add these things, I will give you more money.
Yeah, and we have customers that I swear they've bought um, subscriptions because they just want to support us because they love where we're going.
Sure.
And
Yep.
that's a really fascinating thing for me to see, that they just kind of like, yeah, I like what you're doing, but here's where we'd really like you to go. And it's that says a lot. It's the number one thing for me, like going all the way back when we had our first paying customer, and it just sort of came through that whole funnel online. That single purchase was just like, wow, all of this hard work and headache and delays and all of these things that happen. Um, all of a sudden, it's just like somebody found us, they came in and they bought,
Yeah.
and it just sort of validates that, hey, that's because really in the end, in a product like this, it's all about the customer. The customer's going to pay. The customer's going to pay your bills. It either works or it doesn't work. And that was such a big defining moment. And it wasn't a lot of money, of course, or anything. But man, it's just getting that first paying customer. I was just like, and it wasn't someone I was sort of new, was working, walking them through nothing, just online. They're paying for it. They saw the value in the product, and that was such a big lift for us. And that's something that I'm actually not very good at sales. That's something I've really got to work on. I'm such a product guy at heart, such a designer at heart. But that's that next step, that not only getting feedback from the customers, but really understanding what will get them to buy, and learning that sales process, and actually doing those sales myself, so we can start to grow that and understand what they want. That's so important too. And that's something that for a startup, I would say that, I didn't do a very good job of, but I would say right off the bat is start selling right away. Learn from your customers, but also figure out what will get them to buy. And you need to get those sales, because you need to get even that first sale to validate that, yes, someone is willing to pay for this, is a really, really big step, even though it doesn't come even close to covering any costs. It is a big step to validate that, yes, you've got something that people want, And so that's something that as soon as you launch, you also got to try and get those sales, or even before you launch, try and get that sale to just validate that someone is actually willing to say more than, hey, this is great, a great idea. They're actually willing to pop in their credit card and pay for it.
Totally. Blaine, I hate to cut you short, but we're out of time. This has been awesome. Maybe kind of just in closing, let's promote kind of, again, where people can find, it's dryrun.com, but maybe let's promote a little bit where people can find either Dryrun on other social media sites and yourself.
Well, the one we use the most is Twitter. It's my dry run. It's at my dry run. But of course, dryrun.com is the best place to go to get in touch with us. And I can also be found on LinkedIn. You can actually find my LinkedIn profile right from dryrun.com, and connect with me there. Even ask me questions there. And I would really encourage anyone that's interested in giving Dryrun a try. Just sign up for a free trial, and once you're inside there, you can send us messages, ask questions, send feedback. I absolutely love feedback, and you can even email me directly. The easiest way to spell, I'll say, is hello@dryrun.com, just instead of trying to spell my name. So
Sure. No, that's awesome. And I will post those links in the show notes as well for anybody listening. They can go to the website, buildingthefutureshow.com. But Blaine, again, thanks for doing this. This has been awesome. We could keep talking for probably another hour or two. We'll have to do another show. I know I'm curious about another project that you're kind of working on. I won't mention it now, but I definitely want to have you again on the show to cover what you're doing with that product. I think it's always kind of been a passion of mine, kind of growing up, and I think it's interesting, and I think we could definitely do another show on it. So we'll leave it at that. You'll be on the show again in the new year. And again, thanks for doing this. It's been awesome, and we'll be in touch soon.
terrific. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Blaine. Talk soon.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. You can visit past shows at buildingthefutureshow.com. If you're going to the Startup Expo on February 16th and 17th in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and want to record an episode, please contact me. The music for the show is by Electric Mantra. Check them out at electricmantra.com. Until next time, keep building the future.